What's going on, growers? It's James Prigioni coming to you live from Jersey. Today, me and Tuck are going to show you how to easily grow tomatoes in containers so you can be harvesting fresh tomatoes from your backyard or patio. Let's go! This is the end goal right here, to have fresh, organically grown tomatoes in pots that are ready to be eaten. Now, let's get into how anyone can grow tomatoes like this. First, we need to choose which varieties of tomato that we want to grow. If you have enough space and you can allow a tomato to sprawl out or grow up a trellis, I suggest you grow one of my two favorite varieties. This one right here is the Super Sweet 100, an excellent tomato, so prolific, good flavor, and one of my all-time favorites. Another one of my favorites is the other one over here. This is my favorite all-time flavored tomato. This is the Sun Gold Cherry. Excellent producer, like I said, great flavor, overall amazing tomato. But if you're in a location that doesn't have much space and you're only in only have limited room, then you could grow a tomato like this. This is the Orange Hat tomato. It's a determinate variety, and this is as big as it gets. It only gets about 9 inches tall. Still has some excellent fruit on it. So depending upon how much space you have to grow in, that might aid you in which variety of tomato you should actually grow. I don't know if you noticed in the background, but the boss is out here just looking for some fresh cucumbers to eat. He's always out looking for snacks. Look at this guy. Tech, what are you doing, boy? You're gonna ruin my plants. There you go, boy, take it. We'll have to hold it while he grabs his own harvest. This dog's just hilarious, but let's get back into actually how we're gonna grow our tomatoes in containers. After choosing which variety of tomatoes that we want to grow, we can actually start getting our seeds planted about 6 weeks before our last expected frost date. What I like to do is plant my seeds into cells. So I fill these cells up with a good quality potting mix. One of my favorites is the Happy Frog soil. After I fill that up, I plant my tomato seeds about 1/4 inch deep. Then I'll water the whole tray in, cover it with a plastic cover, and then put it in my house underneath the heat mat. I use the heat mat when starting my tomato seeds because the tomato seeds will germinate based on temperature. So if the temperature of the soil is between 75 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit, then the tomato seeds will only take about a week to germinate. But if the soil temperatures are about like 60 degrees Fahrenheit, then the tomato seeds will take up to 2 weeks to germinate. Once I see the tomato seeds start to first push out of the soil, I take my trays and move them to a location that gets full sun. I prefer bringing my tomato plants into the greenhouse before they actually fully pop out of the soil, because if you leave your tomato seeds in a location that's like not in sun, or it's a location that's really warm, then the tomato seeds will grow really tall and leggy, which is not what we want. When the tomato seedlings first pop up, you want to keep them in temperatures like below about like 70-75 degrees. Anything over 75 degrees is gonna cause your tomato plants to grow a little too quick and a little too tall. We want them to be small, strong, and stout. Once the seedlings have 2 true leaves, they're ready to be transplanted into a larger pot. I like going from my small cells into a 4-inch pot. I don't like going from the cells into a 5-gallon bucket, because typically at the time of year when I'm transplanting, it's too cold outside for me to put my tomatoes outside. I have to put them in the greenhouse. So when I put them in a small 4-inch pot, that saves a lot of space in the greenhouse. I also don't like taking the seed cells and going right into a 5-gallon bucket, because I'd rather plant a more mature plant into a 5-gallon bucket. This way that we don't have any soil that stays damp at the bottom of the bucket. I want to put a tomato plant in that's big enough to be able to suck up that moisture from the whole entire bucket, especially at the bottom, relatively quickly. I don't want any sitting damp water at the bottom that can go anaerobic. After a couple weeks of the plants growing in a greenhouse or an indoor grow room, they're ready to be transplanted into larger containers. Before we do that though, it's important to mention that when it comes to growing in containers, one of the most important things is having good drainage. So to make sure I have good drainage, what I like to do is take a 5-gallon bucket that I get from Lowe's or Home Depot. I flip it over and I drill a bunch of holes in the bottom of it with a 1/2-inch drill bit. This makes sure that I have really good drainage in my pot. It's important to note that if you're growing in 5-gallon buckets, you want to make sure that they are food-safe containers. It will say it on the side of the bucket. Just make sure you're only growing in food-safe containers if they're plastic. Now that our containers are prepped and ready to be planted into, it's time to move on to soil. So when it comes to soil and containers, you can either use a high-quality potting mix, or you can do what I do and make your own soil. So when I make my soil, I use a very basic mixture. You can do the same thing. It consists of 3 equal parts. It's 1/3 either cocoa core or peat moss. It's up to you. I like using the cocoa core. Then it's 1/3 either vermiculite or perlite. And then it's 1/3 compost. I take those 3 elements, I mix them all together on a tarp. That tarp really helps me mix everything. It works a lot better on a tarp than trying to do it by hand like in a bucket. And then I take that soil and put it into my 5-gallon buckets. I am using mushroom compost as my compost component. And because this compost was used to grow mushrooms, it could be a little depleted in regards to nutrition, because those mushrooms have like sucked out a good amount of available nitrogen from that compost. So to compensate for this, what I like to do is use a half a cup of a fertilizer like this. The Ivy Organic all-purpose fertilizer works fantastic. I like this stuff a lot. Or you can use something more specific like the Happy Frog fertilizer, which is basically made for tomatoes. And I like this one a lot also because it has the mycorrhizal fungi in it. So when you're planting, this really helps get the mycorrhizal association. Now that our containers are filled and our tomato plants are relatively mature, we can start transplanting them into their 5-gallon buckets, their final home. When I'm filling up my bucket, I only fill it up about 80% of the way on purpose. This way, later on, I can add a top dressing of some soil mixed with fertilizer just to give the plant some added nutrition when it starts heading into production. Another thing is, when I use this top dressing to bury the stem, the tomato will actually root from any location that I do bury the stem, which is really convenient. If I didn't use the Happy Frog fertilizer at this time, I also like to make sure I inoculate my roots of the plants with the mycorrhizal fungi. For this, I just use the Mykos. It works really well just to make sure I get that mycorrhizal association. And when I do transplant the tomatoes in, I bury them deeper than they came out of the cells because, like I mentioned earlier, any part of the stem that gets buried in the tomato will grow additional roots. It's very important that before you bring your tomato plants outside for good, that you first harden them off. Hardening off is basically just getting your tomato plants used to those outdoor growing conditions before you transplant them out or bring them to the new home outside. So to do this, what I like to do is I bring my tomato plants outside the first day and I put them in the shade and I leave them out there for only like an hour or so. Then I bring the plants back in. As the days progress, I bring the tomato plant out again and allow it to stay outside for a longer period of time until it can stay outside for 24 hours on its own. Then I know that my plant is ready to be outside for good. So you need to make sure, it's very important, that you first harden your plants off before you either transplant them in the ground or you bring your 5-gallon pots outside. At this point, your tomato plant should be in cruise control. Just make sure you stay on top of watering. You want the plants to have adequate moisture, but you don't want to overwater. What I like to do is see how much water my plant needs or has based on the weight. So what I'll do is, if my plant needs water, I'll go out in the morning and I'll make sure to water the plant, and I won't get any of the leaves wet. We want to make sure we're not getting any of the leaves wet because that just opens up the opportunity for diseases, fungal issues, and we just don't want to get the leaves wet. After I have my plant all watered, what I like to do is lift the pot up and feel the weight of it. So I still feel that this thing's relatively light. I know it needs a little more water. So I'll add some additional water. And you'll notice at the bottom, I have a tray down here. Because I drilled so many drainage holes, the water can drain out relatively quick. I put this tray down here so the water can build up, and this allows the plant to actually suck up some of that moisture so that the soil becomes fully saturated. Then after I water, I lift the pot to make sure to feel how heavy it is. Then I'll come out as days continue, and when the pot starts to get too light, I'll add some more water. So I have found that the best way to see when your potted plants need water is just to base it on weight. Now that our tomatoes are growing well, it's time to decide whether or not we want our tomatoes to bush out and sprawl out and grow in all different directions, like this one right here, or we could prune and tie our tomatoes to a string or trellis, like I did here. You'll notice for the Super Sweet 100 tomato plant, I allowed a couple different tops to grow in different directions up a peach tree right here. To do this, I tied a string to a branch on my peach tree. Then I took that string and ran it all the way down to my bucket. I tied that string to the handle on my bucket. Then I took these tomato clips that I love. There's a link in the description. They just work so fantastic. I took these clips and attached the clips to the string and then used that to attach my tomato plants to the string. After that, what I did was I went down and I removed any of the extra suckers on the lower part of the tomato plant. I also removed about the first foot of sun leaves, anything down low there, just to increase the airflow and avoid any issues when it comes to disease. On the other hand, my orange hat tomato is a bush type, so I didn't need to do any tying. It's also a very compact plant, so I don't need to do any staking either. I can kind of just let the plant do its own thing. As the weather starts to warm, I like to make sure that I have a nice, thick mulch down. For right now, I'm using a diced leaf mulch. This works fantastic. The mulch is so important because it helps retain the moisture in the soil, but it also helps keep the temperature of the soil relatively cool when it's getting really hot out. Indeterminate tomatoes, like this one here, the Sun Gold Cherry, or even like the Super Sweet 100 over here, these tomatoes will continue to produce up until the frost. So you may need to add another round of additional fertilizer. What you should do is just monitor the plants, watch what's going on, and if you see some of the leaves starting to turn a paler green, add a little fertilizer. The important thing to do is to let the plants tell you what to do. If you're new to gardening and you have the space, I suggest growing the Super Sweet 100 tomato. It's easy to grow, it's extremely disease resistant, it pumps out an insane amount of tomatoes, and it will continue to produce well for you up until the frost. If you don't have as much space, I suggest going with something like this orange hat tomato. This thing right here will only get, like I mentioned, about 9 inches tall, and you'll notice I grew it in this 5-gallon bucket, but I'm 95% positive that I could have got by just growing it in a much smaller bucket, like a 6-inch bucket, even though it's doing real well. Like I mentioned earlier, the Super Sweet 100, that's an indeterminate variety. It's gonna keep growing and producing up until the frost. This right here is a determinate variety, which means it's gonna put out this large flush of fruit here, and then after all this fruit is finished, it's gonna quit producing. So make sure you know what kind of tomato you're growing when you're growing them in buckets. If you want to grow a variety of tomato specifically for flavor, then I suggest you go with the Sun Gold Cherry. This, in my opinion, is the best tasting tomato by far. I want to mention, if you want to get like a more detailed description of how to prune tomatoes or how to make your tomatoes ripen quicker, me and Tuck have some specific videos about that. Look at him over there drinking some water. This guy's still out here, still working hard. He's making sure that he stays hydrated. So if you want more detailed descriptions on how to prune your tomatoes or make them ripen quicker, we've got some videos on that. This video was more about giving you all the basic tools to equip yourself so you can grow your own fresh, homegrown tomatoes in your backyard or on your patio. Let's actually taste one of these, the fruits of our labor. So I love like the potted videos because this is just like making it so anyone could do it. You don't even need a lot of space. Notice where I planted these tomato plants. I'm underneath a peach tree. Yeah, the peach tree gets a lot of sunlight because of the way I prune the peach tree. It has a lot of windows of light for the tomatoes to actually be able to get a good amount of light. You want to make sure your tomatoes get at least like 6 hours of sunlight, but it's just evidence that basically anyone can grow tomatoes if they have just a little bit of space. Let's actually taste it though. Look at the beauty, look at the color. The Sun Gold Cherry. My favorite all-time tasting tomato. I don't know if you can categorize it as fruit or veggie. It's got to be called a candy because this thing is so sweet. It tastes like candy, and then it hits you with that little bit of acidity at the end. Nothing like organic, nothing like fresh, nothing like homegrown. Like Bill Mollison always says, if you want organic food, you got to grow it yourself. That's today's video, growers. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. Me and Tuck are growing tomatoes about every way you can. We've got them growing in the ground, up stakes. We've got them growing in raised beds, up strings. We've even got them growing in pots, up strings, or just growing in pots, sprawling out. So there's not one way that you have to grow tomatoes. It's just important that you do get some planted, because there's nothing like the absolute joy of planting something, growing it, and then getting to actually harvest it. It tastes even sweeter when you do it yourself, in my opinion. I wanted to mention for you guys to check out the merch at jamesprigioni.com. If you want to contribute to the channel, if you want to support the channel, if you want to be a part of Team Grow, grab a shirt, grab a kneeler, grab one of the water bottles, and if you want to see Tuck in a lot more of the videos, this guy never quits, he never stops, he's always out here. You saw he's been chugging water today because it's very hot. Spam the hearts down low, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button for the boss, the leader, the king of the garden, Tuck himself. I also wanted to mention and thank one of our new channel members, the Gentleman Homesteader. Thanks for being a part of Team Grow. Thanks for contributing to everything out here, and you have your hands in everything we've done because you are part of the team. So me and Tuck wanted to thank you from the bottom of our heart for all that and all the continued support and love in the comments, all the hearts for Tuck, all the encouraging words. That's like fuel for me and Tuck to continue making videos and try to always get better and bring you more value if possible. So Tuck and James, we'll be back to you again real soon. We out.